أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع نفوسنا أبي القاسم مصطفى محمد. وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين وأصحابه الغر الميامين. الحمد لله الذي جعلنا من المتمسكين بولاية أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. أما بعد، يقول الله في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فلينظر الإنسان مما خلق من ماء دافق يخرج من بين الصلب والترائب. In the name of God, the most beneficent, most merciful. Tonight, with the dedicated time that I've been given, inshallah, we will look at a very important topic. That topic being a person's identity. The discussion concerning identity or recognizing one's identity is without a doubt a fundamental discussion within contemporary society. You see, when we look at our identity, from a very young age, we are onto something. We figure out something from youth. And what is that? Especially for people who are living in a Western society like Australia. When our youth grow up in a country that is Western, they begin to realize that the way that they live their lives is a bit different to the other lay, normal, average Australian. The way an Afghani lives their life compared to how a Caucasian Australian lives their lives is quite different. See, throughout childhood, as a kid, you realize that even when you're small, there are certain things that the white people do that we don't do. For example, as a child, you always wondered, why is it that we don't celebrate Christmas? Or why we don't celebrate Easter? Or why are we taking off days of work that is not in line with the days of work of the other people? Whether this be Eid al-Ghadir, Eid al-Adha, whatever it might be. And then when you ask your parents, as in mom and dad, why don't we celebrate Eid, or why don't we celebrate Christmas or something? Some give varying answers. They give different answers. And then as you age, as you grow up towards your teenage years, that trend continues. We call it a linear trend because it is consistent throughout time, where you will find that the way you see the world and the way your fellow friend called Harry, let's say, or your random co-worker called Peter, sees it quite differently. Now, throughout your teenage years, you realize that your peers, your teenage peers, are engaging in acts which you may not necessarily engage in. This could be, for example, beginning social relationships like dating. Within the Western world, dating is quite normal and very common. But then you, as a Muslim growing up in the West, you always get told by your parents, you can't date. And then, for example, you have, Valentine's Day, or you have, in our school system, we have prom and graduation and that kind of thing, or valedictory and parties. But then you realize that even those ones you can't attend. So what happens is it begins to make a person question themselves. Why is it that I'm so different compared to my friend who may be white, for example? And then, for example, you have dietary changes as well. You realize as a child that what I'm eating and what my friend Harry is eating are completely different. Why is it that Harry can eat pork, but I can't? Or for example, you grow older and you realize that Peter can drink alcohol, but you can't. So you begin to question yourself, why is it that there is this difference? And even when you go throughout your adult lifehood, the trend is exactly the same. Yes? So when we look at our college years, those who will go to university, you realize that there's a whole different vibe to university. People go out partying, they do drugs, you've got substance use. That's the vibe. But then you realize, at least theoretically, I'm hoping you realize, that this is not the right thing to do. Or maybe it's not necessarily something acceptable for you to be doing. So the question then comes for a person to ask themselves, at every stage in our lives, we live differently to the people around us. So then we question yourself, what is my place in society? What is my identity within the community that I live in, within the city that I live in, within, let's say, the country that I live in? And then the big question is, what is my identity? Because I do things the way I've been taught, and then somehow I realize that no, there's no universal way or universally accepted way of doing things. The way I do things may be different to the way other people do things. Now, when I ask this question, what is my identity? The unfortunate thing about it is that the answer is far complex and complicated compared to how you think it might be. The reason why is because you identify in a multitude of identities. What do I mean? I mean that you identify in a number of ways. Let me give you some examples. One way you can identify yourself is through your ethnicity. Yes? When you ask someone, what are you? Or introduce yourself. They'll say, my brother, I am an Afghani. Or you go to another person and they'll say, my brother, I am an Iraqi. Or I am an Arab. You go to another, they say, I am, for example, Anglo-Saxon. Or another person, they'll say, I'm Pakistani. So you identify through your ethnicity. That's one way you can identify. Another way you identify, for example, is through your profession and your career. Yes? You have some people who are very proud of their profession, proud of their career. They'll say, you got to call me doctor. If you don't call me doctor, then I'm going to be a bit sad because I worked hard for that PhD degree. Yes? So some people identify through their profession. You ask them, what are you? They say, I'm an engineer and I make such and such. And without my expertise, these rail works would not be created, or so on and so forth. Or for example, you say, I'm a psychologist and I deal with people who have mental health issues. So you identify with your profession. Another way you identify is through your last name. For example, someone says, I am an Abbasi. Another says, I'm a Ziraki. Another says, I'm, for example, a Ja'fari. Another says, I'm a Rizai. You identify through your last name. Yes? So now, at the end of the day, though, the big question comes is, which one am I? Am I a Muslim or am I an Australian? Am I an Australian Muslim or am I a Muslim Australian? This conundrum is a question that every single one of us will probably face in our lives. What comes first? My identity as an Australian or my identity as a Muslim? And how do I identify? And why is it crucial that we ask this question? Because the way a person identifies themselves, their conduct and their behavior is linked like this. The way I see myself, my behavior is automatically going to be related to how I see myself. So in other words, how you see yourself will affect your conduct. How the way you see the world or the way you see yourself, the way you behave with people will also be affected. So then we begin to question, what does Islam say about my identity? What does Islam say your identity is? And how is it that you should live your life? Because until I don't understand my true identity, my foundational identity, these do's and don'ts in Islam, they're going to make a little bit gray for me. Why? Because from the core belief system, I am an independent human being. I choose to do things the way I want to do it. And then suddenly you've got a religion who comes forward and says, you can't do this, you can't do that. Why? Why is there such a restriction? I thought I was free. So until I understand my actual foundational identity of what Islam wants from me, these do's and don'ts, yes, these mustahabbat, these, for example, wajibat, or these makruh and so on, these things won't make sense to me. So inshallah tonight we'll delve briefly into what that identity is. Let me give you an example. You've got a friend who sleeps very much late at night. A person who sleeps late at night, what do you call them? A night owl. Because this guy is going to stay up until 2 to 3 a.m. in the morning. Fajr, we don't know if he's going to pray or not, but he's going to stay up. So you automatically classify him as what? A night owl. Then you've got another person who identifies the opposite way. He actually wakes up very early and he goes to sleep very early. So then you've got your one friend who is what? A night owl. This friend of yours wakes up early. What do you call him? You call him an early bird because he wakes up early. Notice one thing, that automatically when you say night owl, you already know what the guy is going to be doing. Which is why I said your identity is linked with the way you will behave and vice versa. When I automatically say an early bird, automatically you know the guy is going to wake up 5 o'clock in the morning to go to the gym for a session. Because you understand that there's a link between how a person identifies and the action associated with it. In other words, his identity is based on him waking up early. That's why you call him an early bird. Let's say your mum tells you that, my son, I want you to go take the garbage out. He tells you in the afternoon, she tells you in the afternoon, but you don't listen to her because you're busy playing games, whatever you might be doing. I don't know what the trend is today. And then it turns night. It gets dark. It gets dark, but you still haven't taken the garbage out. Now you got to take it out. So as you take the garbage out, you're walking throughout your alleyway in front of your house towards the garbage. On your side, there's a bush. It's dark, you're scared. Out of nowhere, there's a rustling in that bush. Pay attention, my dear brothers and sisters. There is a rustling in that bush. What does your instinct tell you? Your instinct at this moment automatically tells you what is in that bush. And remember, I said the moment you understand the identity of a thing, you know what it's going to do to you, right? So you ask yourself, what is this rustling thing in the bush? Because depending on the identity of whatever is rustling in that bush, your reaction to it will be different. Let me give you an example. If, for example, it is a snake, then you have to hit them gears and run away as fast as you can. Yes, if that rustling in the bush is a snake. If the rustling in the bush is a small rabbit, then what happens? Your action completely changes. You don't run away. Why? Because the rabbit doesn't harm you. So now you're just ignoring it and you're going to go take the garbage out. Lastly, let's say if it's, for example, a rat. A rat can cause scares to some people. But the point is, how you identify something will affect how you engage with that thing, whatever it might be. If it's a snake in that bush, then you're hitting the gas and you're running away as fast as you can. If it's, for example, a rabbit, then you know it's not going to harm you. And you might just ignore it and take the trash out. So remember, we identify in a multitude of identities. It's not just one. And I went through it. Afghani, whatever, doctor, whatever you want to call yourself. But then what if they clash one another? Because remember, when we identify with many things, there will be moments in your life, I'm sure you would have had this, where your identities clash with one another. What do I mean? You see, you don't know what to stick with. Do I stick to being this person at this time, or do I stick to being this person? Because generally what happens is you will give preference to the identity that is more foundational to you, that sticks with you as a person. If I want to give you an example, let's say your friend wants to spend some time with you. He calls you up and says, bro, I'm free today. Let's go do something. And then on the other side, your family tells you, we have a mehmani, or we have guests coming over. We need you to stay. What decision do you make? Do you go see your friend, or do you stay at home because your relatives are coming over? For those who are, let's say, married, yeah, you've got a friend who tells you, hey, let's come spend some time together. We haven't seen each other for a while, and then you get a call from your wife saying she needs help and she needs you to take her to the hospital. Which one do you take? Do you spend time with your friend? Or I'm hoping you do the right thing and you take your wife to the hospital because most likely she's going through labor pain. So what happens is, between these two identities, when they clash, you take the one that is more important and that resonates with you. Why? Because in that moment, your identity as a husband overrides your identity as a friend. It doesn't mean you don't value your friendship, you do. But at that given time, you say to yourself, I am more of a husband right now than I am a friend. So when you have a clash of identities, you will always override the one which always makes you feel yourself. And this is exactly what Islam says. Islam, what does it say? It says, figure out your main identity. Once you figure out your main identity, never let anything override it. If there's a clash between your main identity and anything else, your main identity will always be the one coming out top. That's what Islam is saying. Okay, wonderful. Ya Allah, what is my identity? Because Islam is telling me, find your identity and do not let anything else override it. Okay, what's my identity? Islam says, you want to know what your identity is? The answer is going to be a bit humbling. Because it sometimes can be a difficult pill to swallow. What's your identity? Islam says your core and your most foundational identity is that you're a servant to serve the master. That's all you are. You are a servant and you are serving your master. You own nothing and therefore you are worshipping or you are serving the one who gave you everything. This is your most foundational identity. Now someone might turn around and say, servant? What type of servant? I own this house. I own this car. I have this job. I have this title. What do you mean servant? Well, I'm nobody's servant. Because like I said, the answer is a tough pill to swallow because it hits the ego. It stabs your ego. Nobody wants to be classified as a servant. But Islam is making it clear to you that your identity, your most foundational one, is you're a servant. Because you don't own anything. And when you don't own anything, you have no authority over anything. And rather you should serve the one who has authority over everything. Because authority comes from ownership. The only way you can have authority if you own something. Yes? If somebody walks on your lawn, you have the right to tell them, get off my lawn. Why? Because you own that lawn. Authority comes from ownership. You own that lawn and therefore you have the authority to tell that person, get off my lawn. But Islam is saying you have no authority because you have no ownership in this world. That's what you are. What gives you permission to say, I am not a servant? Islam says, do you want me to tell you your origin story? You want me to demonstrate to you where you came from? And this, I want my dear brothers and sisters, please pay attention carefully because this is what we show or what we realize what our true origin is. The Quran says, you want me to demonstrate to you, you had no ownership. You say, yes, okay, no problem, demonstrate. He says, very well, let's look at your origin story. The Quran mentions your origin story in Surah At-Tariq, which I mentioned at the start of my lecture, which says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, فَلْيَنْظُرُ الْإِنسَانَ مِمَّا خُلِقَ. Yes, the human being should once sometimes think about where they came from. Because you act like you own everything, you act like you sit on top of a mountain or a throne, you sit in an office with your corporate chair, your ego is as high as Mount Everest. So the Quran is trying to remind you, the person, what do they say? They say the human being should sometimes think about where they came from. Where did they come from? Then it says, خُلِقَ مِن مَاءٍ دَافِقٍ. They came from a spurting fluid or a gushing fluid. You came from a gushing fluid. That's where you came from. Because in your relationship with God, you don't own anything. Then somebody turns around and says, but I thought I was important. I had such cars, I had such professions. No, your origin is you came from a spurting fluid. That's who you are. What did I say? The answer is humbling. Okay, let's go even more back. The Quran says, let's go even more back. Where you were almost nothing and I made you into who you are. And it mentions this in a beautiful 3 verses in Surah Al-Insan. It says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, هل أتى على الإنسان حين من الدهر لم يكن شيئا مذكورا. Was there not a time when each human was not even worth mentioning? Do you know how stabbed that is to the ego of a human? He says, do you not know that there was a time where the human being was not even worth mentioning? In other words, God could create something, a new species, and it would not even mean anything to God. That's who you used to be. The Quran is telling you this so that you humble yourself. Your eyes, your ears, your intellect, they are not part of you. You don't own them. They're not yours. Somebody might turn around and say, "Oh, my eyes, that's mine. It's my eyes." No, it's not. It's not your eyes. Your eyes are what has been given to you by your owner. Your owner is God. They've been entrusted to you. Islamic philosophers call you and I as what we call something as mumkin. Mumkin is something that is in its own existence, it's so weak that it automatically needs something else to exist. Which means it depends on something, and without the dependent of that other thing which exists, you don't exist. If your heart needs beating, you need someone to beat it for you. If you need vision, you need someone to give you eyes. If you need to breathe, you need someone to install lungs into your chest so that you can breathe oxygen. This is what we call a mumkin. You were worth nothing. You were almost nothing. And yet still we have the audacity to say that when Allah asks you to do such and such, He says, let's say pray 5 times a day, then somehow you got people who turn around and say, I don't know if I can commit to that, bro. I don't know if I can commit to praying 5 times. I'll do 2 prayers a day and God will be happy with me. Baba, you're trying to negotiate. This is exactly what you're doing. You're trying to negotiate with your owner. Because in a business deal, when you negotiate when you have some leverage, yes? You say that, look, I have this, and if we don't reach an agreement, you're going to lose this. But you're not in that position to negotiate because you have nothing. If you had the eyes which belong to you, then I would have said, yeah, you're in a good point. You can leverage, you can negotiate. Your eyes does not belong to you. What are you trying to leverage? Your nose, your mouth, your ears, they don't belong to you. What are you trying to negotiate? Imam Ali alayhi salam, he describes the creation or the origin of a human being beautifully in Sermon 163 of Nahj al-Balagha. He says, Ya ayyuhal makhluq as-sawi. These lines are vicious because he says, oh, Ya ayyuhal makhluq as-sawi. Oh, you, the one who was created. Yes, makhluq, khaliq, makhluq. Yes. For those who understand Arabic, khaliq is the one who creates. Makhluq is the one which is being created. So here, clearly, you are the makhluq. You are not the khaliq. Ya ayyuhal makhluq as-sawi. Sawi, khalaqa fasawwa, is where your affairs are ordained. Things are placed in for you. You know how your mum packs your lunch for you when you were young? It's the same thing. Your affairs are ordained for you. Ya ayyuhal makhluq as-sawi. وَالْمُنْشَاءَ الْمَرْعِي فِي الظُّلَمَاتِ الْأَرْحَامِ. What does it say? It says the one who has been nurtured and looked after in the darkness of the wombs. In other words, someone had to hold your hand, bring you into this world. You couldn't do it yourself. You needed the help of someone to be brought into this life. In a later passage, he says, تمور في بطن أمك جنينا لا تحير دعاء ولا تسمع نداء. Yes, it says you used to move around in the womb of your mother as an embryo, neither responding to a call nor being able to hear anything. In other words, you were that weak where you couldn't speak, you couldn't hear, and you used to move around in the darkness of your mother's stomach, womb. That's what Imam Ali is trying to say. He's saying you were something insignificant. Don't reach a stage where you have the audacity to say, this is from me, I did this. In Islamic Irfan, they say, هَذَا مِنْ فَضْلِ رَبِّي. This is from the blessings of my Lord, not my own doing. But that's for another night, inshallah. So, in other words, don't try to approach God from a position of authority saying, I don't want to do this. No. you have no authority, Habibi. It doesn't belong to you. Then he says, ثم أخرجت من مقرك إلى دار لم تشهدها ولم تعرف ثبل منافعها. Then you were taken out of your place in a place where you had not seen and you were not acquainted to. In other words, even when you came out, you had no idea what was going on. You had to be taught from the very basics of life. So the next time you say, I believe in this, or I own this, I don't, Baba, look at your origin story and see who you are. فَمَنْ هَدَاكَ لِاجْتِرَارِ الْغِدَاءِ مِنْ ثَدَاءِ أُمُّكَ. Then Imam asked a very fundamental question. He says, who is it that taught you or go towards your mother when you get hungry? Who? Someone might turn around and say, technology is quite advanced now, where they've realized, and science says that, this comes naturally to the child. When a child goes towards their mother when they're hungry, this is naturally. No, this is not naturally. This is something which was inspired through the child to do. When a child cries, what's the purpose of their cry? It's either to get attention, or to get milk because they're hungry, or they need comfort. But who instilled the mechanism of crying to make that happen? Naturally? No, it's not naturally. Somebody inspired that child to do such a thing. Yeah? So then, in other words, to give you a short, we don't have much time, but in other words, you were something that did not exist without itself, number one. Number two, you had nothing. Number three, you didn't know anything until you were taught the basics of life, because when you are born as a baby, you know nothing. Yes, there are instinctive things which are inspired to you, and the other stuff you have to learn through acquisition as you grow. You needed milk when you were hungry. You had to depend on everything. Your mother had to carry you. Where is all the arrogance coming from? And then to end it, the Quran says beautifully, وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ نَسُوا اللَّهَ فَأَنْسَاهُمْ أَنفُسَهُمْ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ. In other words, do not be like those who forgot Allah, so He made them forget themselves. It is they who are truly rebellious. What does this mean? In other words, the Quran is trying to tell you, don't be that guy. Which guy? The guy who forgets Allah. Why? Well, somebody might turn around and say, look, there are heaps of people who don't even remember God in life, and they're doing pretty chill, I think. So what's the purpose of me trying to remember God? What the Quran is saying, the moment you forget God, you forget yourself. Remember the relationship I said. If you take God out of the picture, you don't exist, because you're that dependent, existent being that needed something to create it. So automatically when you take the God out of the picture, you don't exist. And it says, أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ. They are the ones who are people who will be rebellious. What does this mean? See, when you forget yourself, it doesn't mean you forget yourself through memory. Forgetting yourself is literally losing touch with your higher sense of spirituality. Forgetting yourself is your moral compass and your identity as a servant of God. Because like I said, your relationship between God and you is what? Servant and master. That's what you are. That's what you are. And what happens when a person forgets Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? They forget themselves. And what are some characteristics and examples of when a person forgets themselves? The first one is, for example, they choose what to do and what they want to do. Because now you don't have a higher power telling you what to do. So you're like, you know what? I'm going to do what I want to do. Who cares? There's no accountability. I'm free. There's nothing. Number two, they choose materialistic desires over something which is more permanent. In other words, their focus and their life becomes only materialistic desires. Whether that's wealth, whether that's women, whether that's whatever it might be. This is your sole purpose. That's what happens when you forget God. Another one is you rationalize sin or injustice. You see someone committing something wrong, or you see someone being treated unjustly. You try to, or actually, let's say you yourself do the wrong thing. You try to justify, you know what, it's not that big of a deal. I'm sure there are sins greater than the sin that I committed. Yes? Another one is, for example, they lose ma'rifah of their soul. This is in Irfan, you studied a bit deeper. When you lose ma'rifah, you lose knowingness or consciousness from your own soul. When your soul becomes darkened, then sins become light, very easy to do. And finally, they become as what we call fasiqun. أولئك هم الفاسقون. It leads to something which you call Yazidi ideology. When we come tonight, we remember Yazid and Hussein. So when I say Yazidi ideology, so if I say that I want to do this and there's no accountability, that's what you call Yazidi ideology. Yazidi ideology is where you get to do what you want and you're not scared of what's going to happen later on, because all you care about is just having fun in the moment. That's what Yazidi ideology is. And it reaches a stage where, subhanAllah, looking back at history, it reaches a stage where a person reaches arrogance so high where you become like Pharaoh. Pharaoh in the Quran used to say, Ana Rabbukumul A'la, I am your Lord, the Most High. In other words, you become so arrogant where you consider yourself as God. This is what happens when you forget yourself and you forget your God. So inshallah, we continue to stay on the path of Nabi Musa alayhi salam, because he is the opposite of the tyrant king like Fir'aun. And inshallah, we'll continue to do such things on a blessed night. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.